I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon. And I just returned from a trip of a lifetime. Yes, I was at Paris for the Olympics. It was my very first Olympic Games experience as a spectator. Now, I dedicated years of my life aiming to make the Olympic Games as an athlete. And I missed it twice, Barcelona in 1992, Atlanta in 1996. So I never got to go as an athlete. And until this year, I'd never spectated. I just watched it in television. Obviously, in my formative years, it was massively impactful. Now, as a coach, I helped some Olympic athletes on their journey, although most of my elite coaching was focused on long course triathlon, aka the IRONMAN, which of course is not an Olympic event. And so the reason that I went to the Olympic Games in Paris just a couple of weeks ago was that it was all around fun, a spectator with my family. And it was terrific. But of course, while I'm there, I couldn't help watching it also through the lens of a coach. And over all of the events that we saw, including the final of the women's team gymnastics, the triathlon events, multiple nights of swimming finals, track and field, I saw consistent trends starting to emerge amongst the participating athletes. Much of the behaviour, the body language, the actions of competing Olympians reminded me of my work with world-class athletes. And I realised that over the week of spectating, there were many lessons that were just too good not to share. And so here we are, this show. It's titled Performance Lessons from Olympians and Elite Coaching. It's a show that's anchored in two main areas. The first is my observations just over the last week or two from the racing and the athletes that I got to see at the Paris Olympics, but also, in parallel, my thoughts of a coach of world-class athletes and their journey, because I couldn't help but see some of the patterns, and so I thought I would share them with you. Now, my goal in building this show is to frame some actionable strategies that you can apply to your own performance journey, whether that's in sport, of course, or in business or broader life. As we go through, I'm going to try and tell you a few stories, maybe draw some parallels to make the lessons as actionable and as simple as you can. It's all going to be in the meat and potatoes. But just before we get going, I've got two quick notes for you. The first is an invitation. On August the 23rd, I'm going to be hosting 9 a.m. Pacific, although the time zone doesn't matter too much on this because you can always get the recording just by registering for the event, but I'm hosting a free educational webinar. It's all part of our performance webinar series that we're doing over the course of this year, and this one is for the triathletes in our listenership because it's focused on the key lessons that I've learned over the last 20 years of coaching on how to execute and nail an Ironman or a half Ironman, if that's your cup of tea, in 8 to 12 hours a week of training. And so in other words, I'm answering some of the questions. How do you train for the demands of the event while also amplifying how you perform in broader life? How do you ensure that you avoid converting a fun and challenging hobby and quest into a second job? And how do you avoid many of the pitfalls that so many athletes fall into when they take on their Ironman journey? It turns out that at Purple Patch, we're pretty good at cracking the code. We've qualified over 1,500 athletes to World Championship events. We've had countless first-timers and an unparalleled reputation of coaching successfully time-starved athletes. And of course, I want to help. It's part of our purpose at Purple Patch. Of course, it's free. You do not need to be a Purple Patch athlete to participate. In fact, we would love to welcome people from far and wide. It's August the 23rd. Feel free to attend live. And if you do attend live, you can ask me your questions in a thorough Q&A session that we plan to have after the presentation. But also, you can also register and get the recording. And so you can get the information without having to actually attend live. We understand that people live busy lives. After all, we work with time-starved athletes. I think you'll appreciate it. The link is in the show notes. Register, join, share with those that you think are interested. And of course, across your social channels, it's really appreciated. And secondly, just a note, I'm not going to interrupt your listening today with any ads or promotions about Purple Patch services. With this said, it's suffice to say that if you would like to further your conversation, and if you have questions or if you want to set up a complimentary consultation for any of your performance needs, feel free to reach out. It's very simple, info@purplepatchfitness.com. We're always happy to help with a complimentary call. And with that, we're going to dive into the lessons of Olympians and my journey in elite coaching. It is, ladies and gentlemen, Barry, get the drum rolls, here we go, the meat and potatoes. So what can we learn from Olympians? Well, it turns out quite a lot. And you don't need to be an elite athlete to benefit from these lessons. And so I'm going to frame today's show in a repeatable and accessible pattern. I've got three main principles that I've filtered through. There are many lessons, and I've decided just to build the show around three of them. And I've built them in a structure where I have my observations as a spectator at the Olympics, and I'm going to go through there, a parallel lesson from my elite coaching that I did with world-class Ironman athletes, and then an applying principle for you to take away and maybe apply to your performance journey. And so you can anticipate each of those. So we've got three main themes or observations that we're going to build it around. And we might even do a follow-up to this because there's a lot more, there's many more. I don't get to tell you my Tim Reed story of why I could say to him when he went on to win his world championship, go and have fun. There was a lot of substance to that. We're not going to talk about that today, but we are going to talk about some key observations that I saw at Olympics. So without further ado, let's crack on and let's do part one. Part one of this is a simple and important driver. And that's that I consistently observed the importance of ritual. In other words, making something very unfamiliar as familiar as possible. So here's the observation that I saw, and this extended across all of the sports. And that's the simple fact that the Olympic Games is really like no other. And in the finals, individual athletes are called out one at a time. Whether it's swimming, whether it's track and field, up they come. Now in the swimming pool, which is where I spent 3 nights of swimming finals, there are around 15,000 spectators cheering, cameras from every direction, pointing straight in that swimmer's face. And they come out of the archway and you feel like you have the world staring at you. And the reason you feel like that is because you have the world staring at you. It is like no other sporting occasion for these athletes. And it's also amplified, I believe, by the internal realization for the athletes that this event doesn't happen every year. There's no second pass. It's occurring every 4 years, which over the course of a career for an athlete is a heck of a long time. And so even for returning Olympians, even returning Olympic gold medalists, this is not a particularly familiar situation. And this is why routine and ritual is so important. As I observed many of the athletes coming out and walking onto the pool deck, I started to see their actions from the time of their calling out, walking through that archway, to when the gun went off. And typically, as you saw many of them go through their routines multiple nights in a row because they might have qualified for multiple finals, I saw something that was really striking. Athletes tended to remove their sweatsuits and their clothes in a similar order on each night. They repeated exactly the same activation exercise, from arm swings to slaps on the chest to jumps to whatever it might be, but it was the same every time. Some of them perhaps kneeled down, grabbed and palmed some water, put it in the mouth and spat the water. Maybe they even did a shout or a cheer. But very, very clearly, this was a rehearsed routine. And I saw a similar pattern to this when I sat and watched the swimming warm-ups, seeing a few swimmers on multiple nights that were executing exactly the same warm-up. They got out at the same time. They were in routine. And this might sound simple, but this is important, and it's absolutely no accident. Because what it becomes is a management tool for the athlete to convert a highly unfamiliar occasion into something that is more familiar. It removes the guesswork and enables a sense of control. In fact, beyond that, what it's doing is it's freeing up the conscious part of our brain to focus on race execution, because the pre-race routine, from warm-up, probably to what they've eaten before they come to the swimming arena, to when they're walking up, it falls into something automagical, into the subconscious. It's very normal. Now, I'm sure that this pattern that I observed in swimming, but also in track and other sports, I'm sure it's doubtless displayed through many of the sports, whether it's skateboarding, track, pistol shooting, judo, archery. And the reason is very simple for this, is it creates an operating framework that enables focus on the aspects that are actually needed to yield positive results. Now, this was really familiar for me as a coach, because we leveraged exactly this principle at greater scale across all of the professional athletes that I coached. So let me give you an example of that from a coaching lesson. And this is out of the actual execution of a race and a pre-race routine or a warm-up. It's actually even bigger than this. For many athletes that I coach, we would even build our training programs to drive familiarity so that the race week going up into race actual day is really familiar to them. And so we build the programs as 10 to 14 days of training, most of those days very demanding, week 1, week 2. And then we had the third week that was labeled a transition week. And that transition week is not easy, but it's a week that would actually follow a familiar and similar pattern to what they can anticipate on race week. So it might be, for example, on Tuesday, a flash of intensity, maybe in the swim, maybe on the bike, but something that's actually pretty high end. On Wednesday, it tends to be more endurance focus. Then we had a very easy Thursday with a little bit of priming and activation work. Similar on Friday, a set of sessions that typically would help you feel better the next day, similar to what they would do in the day before a race. And then a tougher, more race-specific session on either Saturday or Sunday, which are, of course, the normal days for racing for triathletes. And this is a structure that we still leverage across all of the programs at Purple Patch. And those weeks, it's not that you're just repeating a race week going into a tough session every Saturday or Sunday, every third week of the program. It's that the rhythm and the pattern is familiar. And then, of course, when it does become race week, we take that rhythm and pattern and we replicate it. We just have slightly less load so that we can freshen up for the week. And so this pattern and week of training includes a broad session focus no matter what the event is. And it removes all of the guesswork and improves familiarity, both physiologically, but also, of course, mentally. Now, the week of preparation that we leverage going into a race, it's exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether it's getting ready for a B race. It doesn't matter whether you're getting ready for a world championships. Why change it? Just make it familiar. Tell the body, tell the mind you're getting ready to have a peak performance. And so this routine and ritual was always really, really important to help the pros be able to not have to think about that and what they're doing because it's already familiar, and they can just focus on race rehearsal and mindset as they go into it. And so this is really, really similar. Now, of course, athletes would have their own routines, their rituals, what they would do the night before for dinner, what time they would like to get up, what they would have for breakfast, what they would do for pre-race routine and warm-up, what they would think about right before the race start, etc. That's all steeped in preparation and routine. And it's really, really important. So what's your lesson out of this observation? Well, the first is it's very, very simple that you can apply this principle well outside of sport. If you have something looming that's high pressure or challenging and you've got to execute it, and then I would recommend that you try and build a familiar structure around it. Let me give you a specific case study or example of this. I'm actually going to draw on an own personal story of this because this is something that happened to me very recently, but I think it might be easy for you to correlate and understand. a little bit. So recently I went and did a large keynote presentation in front of 25 CEOs, as well as 50 associated board members and senior management at some major organizations. In other words, I was on. I was on stage. I had to deliver a 30 to 40 minute presentation Q&A following. And so what I did on this occasion is I built structure, and here's the word, routine and familiarity around the occasion. And so I did what I like to do if I want to perform, whether it's in meetings, whether it's in sport, whatever it might be. I do what I like to do. I followed my routine. So I woke up early. That's what I like to do normally. I had a nice cup of coffee. I hydrated with my 1 liter of fluid with my 250 tab of precision hydration in there. I read the newspaper, and then I had another coffee. Then I went for a little run. And when I went on that run, I didn't rehearse my speech or anything like that. I listened to a podcast. I tend to listen to a podcast and audio book when I go for my little run in the morning. And then I returned, I hydrated again, I had my breakfast, then I showered. I went to the auditorium where I was speaking. I ordered my customary 3rd cup of coffee. Yep, I do like my morning coffee. And then I sat quietly and I reminded myself of the 3 key things that I wanted to get across in that presentation. And then I was on. Now, I had butterflies. I was excited with the anticipation. And yet what I did with that routine was I put myself in the same operational framework that I do. It's very familiar to me. It established some control. The routine is mine. It works for me. You don't need to emulate it. You need to build something that's good for you. There isn't a right routine apart from the one that works for you. And every athlete is very different from one another. When we looked at the Olympic Games, to bring this back to the title of the show, there were vastly different types of routines here. There was Olympic swimmer Florent Manodou, amazing guy, absolute Adonis of an athlete. He drew energy from the crowd. He was very vocal, but he had the routine. Every race, it followed the same pattern. You could observe Olympic great Caleb Dressel, where he would go through. He would put his clothes in the bin, and then he would stand back, and he would do an explosive jump every single time. That jump went to an impossible height, by the way. Or you had American swimmer Phoebe Bacon, who slapped her skin to activate on her chest, her back, her legs, her arms in a repeatable and what became a very familiar fashion. Now, some of the routines drew from the external, some internal, but the key is ritual. And so I ask you this, what are your routines that help you with a performance framework? Because they are going to give you your control and enable you to focus on the things that are going to help you perform. Observation number 1. All right, we move on. Part 2. Here's the second observation over the course of the Olympic Games, and we're going to talk less about swimming in this one. We're actually going to draw from an observation in the triathlon. The best athletes are highly adaptable and responsive, not reactive, responsive to adversity. So let's talk about the triathlon events here. You may have followed this in the media, but the triathlon events were a stunning success globally. Absolutely incredible racing, a majestic setting across rivers, bridges, the Eiffel Tower, and much more. In other words, one of the great games successes. But it didn't always look like that was going to be the case. There was inclement weather, there were rapid currents in the River Seine, there was the polluted river water. In fact, the events were in major doubt. So much so that the practice swims were cancelled leading up into the actual competitions themselves, and there was a day postponement of the men's triathlon events, which doesn't sound like much. Well, we can't do it on a Thursday, so we do it on a Friday, but it is a huge impact on the athletes' physical preparation as well as their psychology. There was also uncertainty on whether the full format could even be raced, swim, cycling, running, where it would actually be high potential of the triathlon becoming just a bike-run duathlon, in other words, cancelling the swim. And so is this stressful? Sure. But most of the athletes are actually able to adapt to the situation and respond to the adversity. Let's think about what they've gone through. They're planned, for their week. They've executed their race week and all of the preparation, physically, mentally, etc. And then suddenly, woof, everything changes. Doesn't that destroy everything? Isn't that your ritual, your routine that we just talked about as being important, just in ashes? Well, no, not necessarily. And the reason for that is very clearly they planned for such events and situations. In other words, plan A was the normal race week and preparation. But also, the best athletes do a little bit of plan B scenario planning. So how do I know this? Well, I happen to be good friends with one of the leading British sports psychologists that were embedded and working with the triathletes at the Olympic Games. And so I thought, you know what? I should ask her. Very smart woman. And I said, okay, what actually happened here? The event was postponed. There was all of this adversity. What did you say as their leading sports psychologist? What did you say to the athletes? And the answer was pretty simple. And that was the fact that we had a plan A, but there was also a plan B. And that plan B is what the athletes would do practically for their preparation in the event of a shift of format or postponement. So thinking ahead of the structure. And this plan B was just as familiar to them as plan A. Both plans included structure around training, pre-race psych-up, time with families, media, purposeful restful activities, pre-race briefings, and more. In other words, they had a whole roadmap of what to do in this scenario. She also told me that they also reference for the athletes their emotional management tools. In other words, you need to go and get this tool out of the toolkit that you've worked on so that individual athletes could actually recognize when they were starting to get anxious or they were worrying, and they were ready and equipped to connect with either their coach or their sports psychologist if they were indeed struggling. So they had a support network around them. So the key principle in this observation of how they managed through this was that proper prior planning shifted the changes from being a threat to simply a situation that required a shift in mindset and some management and response. And this was really familiar to me as an elite coach. And I thought, okay, there are several scenarios here, but what can I impart to you today on this show to actually help paint the picture here? And I got drawn back to preparing athletes for the Hawaii Ironman World Championship. Most of you guys know that, an incredibly challenging event. Swim, bike and run. Swim 2.4 miles, riding 112 miles, running a marathon 26.2 miles off of the bike in high heat. There are 2 guarantees only for the grueling Ironman Hawaii World Championships. Only 2. Number 1, it's going to be really freaking hard. And number 2, it's going to be really freaking hot. Those are the 2 guarantees that you have. But over the course of the race week there, it is riddled with uncertainty. Are you going to have rain? Are you going to have wind? How windy is it going to be? When is that wind going to emerge over the course of a very long day? It has one of the biggest impacts on how the race will roll out. And the wind factor is a massive impact on the strong cyclists in the pro field. One other element of consideration as well is cloud cover. Because when they get off the bike, if there is no cloud cover, we know we're in for a very, very hot run because the sun is actually coming down and bouncing off of the tarmac, bringing temperatures up, and of course, a high propensity for the sun to blister the skin, etc. Or will it be cloud cover where you're going to get more humidity, but you're also going to have a little bit more of a cooling effect? So there are all of these uncertainties that you have to do all sorts of contingency planning for to help the athletes be successful. Well, one of the athletes that I coached was an incredibly strong cyclist, and he was one of the better Ironman athletes in the world. His name was Chris Lieto. And when I started to coach Chris in 2009, he was the best biker in the sport. And his ideal scenario for the Hawaii Ironman World Championship was for it to be windy as heck. We wanted howling winds. The nastier, the better. And then we would dream of having cloud cover for his run because that was his relative weakness and we didn't want him to bake in the sun. But of course, hope is not a strategy. And so instead, we developed a responsive plan for different types of race execution depending on the wind conditions, the cloud cover, and the changing conditions as the race went on. In other words, if it started still and calm, but the wind started to build on the bike as it went on. And so when we went into the 2009 race, his race was executed based on the third of these, changing conditions as we went. The day began with little wind, and we knew that if there was going to be little wind, it was really important that Chris didn't just sit out in front of the big lead chase pack and sit out in front on the bike, not leveraging any of the legal benefits of drafting 10 meters apart or so, although in those years it was a little bit closer, it was a little bit more like 7 meters at best. But we knew that it wouldn't be a good strategy to actually ride just out front. So Chris sat in the group for the first half of the bike ride. And he sat there being really patient, so patient that I was getting nervous, and even more nervous as the commentators suggested that perhaps Mr. Lieto was having a tough day out there. But in fact, it was planned. And luckily for us and for Chris, the wind started to whip up in the last 90 minutes of riding. We had about 35 miles to go. Chris had a very minor lead. He'd gone to the front at the turnaround in Harvey, and he came down, and with about 35 miles to go, he had about a 45-second lead. But the wind came up, and it whipped up. And the strategy was, if we have wind, we go. And so Chris attacked. He attacked by keeping his power very, very strong. And over the course of that last 35 miles, he built up a 10-plus minute lead. So that was a huge component, but it was a tactical application of scenario planning. He went on to get second in that year's Hawaii Ironman World Championship. In other words, scenario planning and response to situations is massively important for any athlete. But how does this apply to you in life? Well, let's think about time-starved athletes. On a week-to-week basis, the biggest mistake that I see amateur athletes make is that they follow a static training program that's either been built for them or maybe built by some fancy-pantsy AI machine that really isn't that useful yet, but anyway, or a coach, and they have this plan. And they force this plan into life, ignoring the realities of what's going on with their day-to-day and without responding to it. Now, life is not a spreadsheet. It's dirty. It's dynamic. It's unpredictable. Things happen. And so the key asset in this is not to treat your training plan as just checking a box and saying, well, this was what was written to me 5 days ago, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and so my success is getting every workout in. That's fool's gold. Your success is actually adapting the program relative to how your body's doing and what's happening in the rest of life. And having the courage to actually shift things around a little bit, potentially even reducing the duration of some of your workouts, even removing some of the intensity, so that you can actually build up the magic word of training, which is consistency. And that's your winning formula over time. And so having scenario planning of this is what I plan, but actually now, as life happens, this is where I'm going to adapt the program if I'm fatigued or if I'm challenged logistically or I'm running out of time. These are the workouts that I'm going to reduce. These are the workouts that I'm going to retain and ensure that I can nail those at the time that I'm best suited. And that's why we structure at Purple Patch our training weeks just like that. Key sessions, supporting sessions, soul-filling workouts that are easily reduced or, of course, knocked out altogether if necessary. And so that's a contingency plan that we do. And we also love athletes to plan ahead, build out a Sunday special, have the autonomy, have that clarity so that they can make better decisions on the day-to-day basis. That becomes really important for you. But this is well beyond sport as well, because adapting your training program is one thing. But ultimately, the key is that you can take this same principle and apply it to your plans with your family, your business plans, anything in life. If you begin with a rigid mindset and a preset definition of what success looks like, and you believe that is the only path, and then I promise you trouble lies ahead. So instead, planning is the key, and then smart execution and responsiveness, that's the unlock of where you become really effective. And so I encourage you to apply these principles to not just your sport, but also work and life, because it's going to make things much more enjoyable and ultimately much more successful. And with that, we get to transition to my final observation around the Olympics. Yes, observation number 3, part 3 here, guys, and that is all around stress. Building a positive relationship with stress. If you can't do that, you're going to wilt. Observation here. Spectator at the Olympic Games. Let me tell you, making the Olympic Games is tough. I should know, I didn't make it twice. Yeah, that's a lot of years to dedicate. You're putting years of dedication. There are no promises, there's huge risk, and you make it. And now you've got to perform on the biggest stage. And a big part of the external and internal pressure that the athletes feel is the jeopardy that is a part of that. Because I mentioned earlier in the show, the Olympics only comes around every 4 years. There are no second chances. And that is a part of the magic of this thing. The beauty of the Olympics is the fact that it includes unparalleled jeopardy. If the Olympics happened every year, it wouldn't have the same component. This is the Olympic Games every 4 years. And so therefore, it's no wonder that this experience can be crippling for many athletes. Now let's even go a step further. Let's think about the favorites in the events. The weight of external expectation can be huge. A certain French swimmer, what was his name? That's right, Léon Marchand, a prime example of this. The pressure that he was under, seeing it live, it was really quite something. And it could be crippling for him. Or, as we observed, it could become the wind beneath his wings. And so there's a saying that a lot of elite athletes in a lot of sports love to embrace, and it's a fantastic saying. And that's that the pressure is a privilege. In other words, they feel lucky that they get to do something that delivers this type of opportunity, this pressure, this stress. I love that. The pressure is a privilege. You can leverage that in itself. This is a wonderful opportunity. Yes, I'm nervous and worried, but goodness me, this is a privilege that I get to go and do this. And in any experience in life, it is a privilege. But as I keenly watch the athletes, and I watch them come out onto the triathlon pontoon, the swimming blocks, the track and field finals, onto that track, it was stunning for me that you could almost see their body language. You could actually visually feel their pre-race converting into actual race day performance or not. And this wasn't about looking at an athlete and saying, wow, they're really brash and they've got a big ego and they've got big vocals and everything like that. It emerged in a different form. But one thing's for sure is that those that stepped up in the face of that enormous internal and external pressure were the ones that had successfully over time developed a positive relationship with stress. Now, I'm sure that every single athlete there was massively nervous and had lots of butterflies in the stomach. But that's really different from fear, because anxiety and priming is really normal. In fact, it's a prerequisite to get the best performance out of your body. And so this isn't just about being confident and having no worries and anxiety. Of course, that's a part of the equation here. But across the running, the triathlon, the gymnastics, the swimming, it was so easy to observe and see those that were going to meet them external demands and embrace them to leverage better performance, and those that were not. Because it was equally pretty simple to see those that were stuck in the headlights and were actually unable to convert all of their work into a great performance. Now, I should note here that there's no shame for athletes that stuttered. This is the biggest stage. Every athlete at this Games is amazing. Amazing. They're so good. And pressure can get to everyone. But those that really shined, you could almost see them leveraging the stress. And those that got the massive personal breakthroughs, they didn't just meet the demands. They had clearly built a positive relationship with stress. Let's go back to my coaching. When we talked about the Purple Patch Pros, I never talked about winning. I never discussed with Tim Reed trying to win the World Championship, with Rachel Joyce trying to win the World Championship. I never talked about these components. Instead, we focused on the process, on the athlete trying to become the best that they could be, and focusing all of their mind on the aspects that were under their control, the actions that they can take. And we really tried to take back the negativity of failure. And so in other words, we always talk to them about there is no failure if you're on a quest for you to become your best. And as you go through day to day and when you show up on the race, you give it everything that you have and you execute every element that is under your control to the best of your ability. So you just need to go and dance in the fire and see what happens. And it was a very simple concept, but we never chased outcomes. We talked about the process the whole time. And we gave them, we used to sort of call it sometimes, a freedom to fail for the athletes. Look, go out there, give it your best. And if you get beaten by someone, that's okay. But just focus on execution on the things that you can control. Now, years later, I stumbled into some great coaching words that were from a coach that at the time I wasn't overly familiar with, because I grew up in the UK and I wasn't a massive fan of basketball, particularly collegiate basketball, when I was living and growing up as a swimmer in the UK. But most of you guys will know this coach. It's the famed UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden. And he was discussing failure. And I want to just read out what he said and discussed with his point of view around failure. I didn't believe that success or failure was based on the final score. Remember, we're talking about basketball players playing as a team, trying to win basketball games. It wasn't based on the final score. I can sum it up like this. If you truly do your best, and only you will really know that, then you are successful. The actual score is immaterial, whether it was favorable or unfavorable. However, if you fail to do your best, you have failed even though the score might have been to your liking. In other words, I want you to be able to feel, and I want my players sincerely to feel that doing the best that they're capable of is victory in itself. And anything less than that is defeat. That's a winning mindset there, folks. That's incredible. It goes on and he says to keep his players fearless. Coach Wooden never mentioned winning. That sounds familiar to me. He summed up his logic this way. I don't think that you could find any player to tell you that I mentioned winning. I wanted winning to be the byproduct of the preparation. And failure to prepare is preparing to fail. I always wanted them to have that satisfaction within themselves, that peace of mind within themselves, that they made the effort to execute near their own particular level of competency, not trying to be better than someone else, but instead trying to be the best that you could be. Goodness me, that is very parallel. I think that's powerful words. And so when you think about anything that you're doing, whether you're trying to be a great parent, a great business leader, a great athlete, you're trying to accomplish everything, buy into that. Because when you build a positive relationship with yourself, the stress, the demands, but you make it internal, you're equipped to navigate through external, internal pressure. You build a positive relationship with stress because you're putting your mind and focus on things that you can control. And so I invite you to go and apply it to yourself. Evolve your mindset a little bit. Realize that anything worthwhile in life that you're looking to achieve is going to come with a prerequisite of high demand and some form of a mix of internal and external pressure. And the reason for that is because you care about that thing. You own it. And so you're going to have emotions, you're going to have physical feelings because you care, and that's a good thing. And we're pummeled with messaging from the media and health experts and others that stress is really bad. It's harmful. But in fact, it's a necessary prerequisite for growth. It doesn't mean that it's comfortable, that it feels good, and it certainly doesn't mean that in big occasions you're going to avoid all of those butterflies and that feeling of anxiety. But what you can do over time is develop a relationship, a positive relationship with the internal and external forces and pressure. And guess what? Your ability to handle high pressure is not something genetic. It isn't innate. It can be learned, improved, and developed. We can coach it, in fact. It begins with your mindset, and then it's practiced and developed over time. And you think about that. We often talk about a champion athlete taking years to develop. Well, there's a physical component to that, but there's also the fact that they need to develop a high performance mindset. And that doesn't happen with a set of experiences. It occurs with a set of experiences repeated over time so that they create the ability to navigate through this. And so it begins with your mindset. Remember, you care, you want something, therefore stress is a part of it. And so embrace it. And remember that saying, pressure is a privilege. Folks, 3 observations from the Olympics, 3 lessons. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it helpful. Next week, we're going to talk about process and goals. Should be an interesting one as you start to get excited out of the Olympics and start to chart your own performance journey looking forward. That's going to be a cracker. But I'll see you in 4 years' time. Oh no, I'm going to see you in a week's time. We don't have to wait that long. Take care. I hope that was helpful. Guys, thanks so much for joining and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube and you will find it there and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends, and it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience. And we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.